Prior written notice requires them to cite the specific parts of the evaluation they're relying on. It turns no from a conversation ender into the beginning of a documented trail. I'm Jenny Scherson, ex-special educator turned dyslexia interventionist. It wasn't so long ago that I, too, was overwhelmed by balanced literacy versus structured literacy, education speak, and everything in between. Fast forward after many, many hours of self-driven education, and you'll see I've built a thriving dyslexia practice helping students from age 6 to 18. My specialties? Working with a quote-unquote difficult, almost always 2E, student, and breaking down the complexities of dyslexia into everyday language strategies and action steps. So you just had an IEP meeting. Maybe it went okay. Maybe it didn't. But either way, you asked for something, a specific service, an accommodation, a change to your child's program. And the team said no. Or maybe they said, well, think about it. Or that's not really how we do things here. Or my personal favorite, let's table that for now. And you're left feeling stuck, like the conversation is over, like you asked, they answered, and that's that. But here's what nobody's told you. That's not actually how this works. There's something called prior written notice. And if you've never heard of it, you're not alone. Most parents haven't. Prior written notice isn't just a form, it's a paper trail. It's documentation. It's the school putting in writing why they made the decision they made. And once you know it exists, everything changes. Today, we're talking about the document they hope you don't ask for, what it reveals about how decisions are really being made, and why this might be the most powerful tool in your advocacy toolkit that you didn't know you had. Okay, so what actually is prior written notice? In the most basic terms, it's a written explanation from the school about decisions they're making regarding your child's special education services. And I need you to catch something important in that sentence. It's not optional. It's not a courtesy. Under IDEA, the federal special education law, schools are required to provide prior written notice when they propose or refuse to do something related to your child's identification, evaluation, placement, or services. Let me say that again. They are required to give you this in writing. But here's what makes this so powerful. Prior written notice has to include specific things. They have to tell you what they're proposing or refusing to do. They have to explain why they're making that decision. They have to describe what evaluation, assessment, or record they used to make that decision. And they have to explain what other options they considered and why they rejected those options. This isn't a checkbox form. This is them showing their work. Think about what that means. Remember that IEP meeting where they said, we don't really do that here? Prior written notice requires them to explain in writing why they don't do it, what data supports that decision, and what alternatives they consider. Remember, when they said your child's evaluation doesn't really show a need for services, prior written notice requires them to cite the specific parts of the evaluation they're relying on. It turns no from a conversation ender into the beginning of a documented trail. Now, here's where it gets interesting. You know how you can tell prior written notice is powerful? Watch what happens when you ask for it. The room gets quiet, people exchange a few glances, and someone says, well, we can certainly look into that, or I'm not sure that's necessary. Why? Because prior written notice requires them to commit in writing with specifics, and vague explanations don't fly in prior written notice. We feel this is best for the student. Not good enough. They have to explain why it's best based on the data. This is our standard practice. Not good enough. They have to explain why that standard practice is appropriate for your child specifically. We found that this works for most students. Again, not good enough. They have to show evidence that it's appropriate for your child's unique needs. Now, see what just happened? All those responses that sounded reasonable in a meeting, but don't actually say anything, prior written notice makes them unusable. And here's the other thing. Prior written notice creates a record that can be reviewed. by you, by an advocate, by a hearing officer, if it ever comes to that. It's one thing to say in a meeting, we just don't think he needs that. It's another thing entirely to put it in writing. We reviewed the data evaluation, and based on these specific assessments, we determined that the student doesn't need this service. Because now someone can look at those specific assessments and say, actually, these assessments show exactly the opposite. The lack of documentation protects schools. Prior written notice removes that protection. So when does prior written notice really matter? Honestly, pretty much anytime there's a decision being made that you're not completely comfortable with. But let me give you some specific scenarios where requesting prior written notice can be a game changer. When they refuse to evaluate your child, we don't see a need for testing right now, is one thing in a meeting, but prior written notice requires them to document what screening data, observations, or assessments they used to make that determination. And suddenly, it's a lot harder to justify, we just don't think it's necessary. When they deny a service you requested, whether it's intensive reading intervention, speech therapy, occupational therapy, whatever, if you ask for it and they say no, prior written notice makes them explain why, based on what data and what alternatives they considered instead. When they propose a placement change, if they want to move your child to a different classroom, a different program, or reduce their time in special education, prior written notice requires them to document the justification for that change. When they want to exit your child from special education, they have to show that the data that supports that decision, not just say, we think they've made enough progress. Remember, all these decisions are based on data, not emotions and feelings. When they delay making a decision, now this is a big one. Remember that let's gather more data stall we talked about in the last episode. Prior written notice makes them document why the current data isn't sufficient and what specific additional information they need. And here's something most parents don't realize. You can request prior written notice even if they don't offer it, even if they don't mention it, even if they've never provided it before, because it's required. Whether they do it automatically or you have to ask for it, they're legally obligated to provide it. So what actually changes when you know about prior written notice? First, you stop accepting vague explanations because you know you can ask them to put it in writing with specifics. Second, you have documentation, real documentation, not your notes from the meeting that they can later dispute, their official written explanation of their decision making. Third, you can see the gaps in their reasoning. When they have to actually document why they're making a decision, it becomes a lot more obvious when that reasoning doesn't hold up. And fourth, and this might be the most important one, you know you have options even after the meeting ends. Because here's what happens for a lot of parents. You have the meeting, a decision gets made that you're not happy with, you leave feeling like it's done, like you've had your chance to advocate and now you just have to accept what they decided. But prior written notice reminds you that's not true. You can request that written explanation. You can review it. You can disagree with it. You can provide your own documentation that contradicts it. The conversation isn't over just because the meeting ended. So here's what I want you to take away from this episode. Prior written notice isn't just some bureaucratic form. It's leverage. It's transparency. It's accountability. And the fact that most parents have never heard of it tells you something about how the system is set up. Now, knowing that prior written notice exists is one thing. Knowing when to request it, how to request it in a way that gets results, and what to do with it once you have it, now that's something else entirely. That's the work we do in Together Through Dyslexia. Because once you understand the tools available to you, once you know how to use them strategically, once you can walk into an IEP meeting understanding that not just your rights, but how to actually exercise them, that's when everything shifts. You stop feeling like you're always one step behind. You stop accepting vague non-answers, and you stop leaving meetings wondering what just happened. If you're ready to move on from, I didn't know that existed, to, I know exactly what to do with this, I'd love to have you join us in Together Through Dyslexia. All the information is in the show notes. And remember, you don't have to navigate this alone. Until next time, bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Literacy Untangled. If you loved this episode as much as I did, head on over and rate and subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you want to continue the conversation or share your takeaways, head on over to our Instagram at Literacy Untangled and comment on your favorite part. I can't wait to hang out with you again soon. Bye.